know that if my crazy self can do it, no doubt in my mind, you can do it. You can do it. I'm Rebeca Delgado. I'm a staff writer, and we have with us today Lalo Alcaraz, who's our consulting producer and cultural consultant. And we are both a part of the writer's room on Casagrandes. The number one piece of advice that I give to young folks, people just starting out, college students, interns, PAs, what's a good starting point? And I always say, consume as much art as possible. Every book you read, every film you watch, every podcast you listen to is a brick and the foundation that you are going to build every story that you tell for the rest of your career, for the rest of your life. When you are in the room, there's so many times when we're breaking stories as a writer's room and we'll say, oh, let's do an episode where Ronnie Ann goes to summer camp, and all of a sudden, all of us adults are in the room thinking like, what was it like when we were in summer camp? Or maybe you never went to summer camp and we're all remembering our favorite summer camp movies, or we're thinking about all the things that have already been done in a summer camp story, so we want to go in a different direction. But having that sensibility of like, what are the most popular kids movies? What were the movies that I really loved when I was little? Anytime that you are building that, you're building yourself up to be the best writer that you can be. And that's honestly a practice that'll be ongoing in your writing career too.
Don't be that guy that just knows life from TV and film. You should also live your life. And also you can get inspiration from, uncomfortable situations, fun situations. As a political cartoonist, I put into my head as much journalism as I can, as much news, stories. Don't stay in your comfort zone, I guess, is the message I have.
The second point that we have here is write. You only know what kind of writing you love if you try it out. Maybe you think that you are more of a dramatist, but actually you have a really good skill for punch-up jokes and you love the structure of joke telling. If you have a show that you currently love, take a stab at writing your dream episode of that show. At this point, when you're starting out, you are writing, not only to discover what you enjoy about writing, but to find out your skill set as a writer, what you tend to lean to, what you enjoy. And this step is also crucial because you're going to be gathering all of that material to build your portfolio as a writer. So when you have all those samples, you really do, as a writer, tailor your portfolio to the job that you're applying for. And those samples come in two standard forms when it comes to writing. The first is the original sample. And this can be something that is a personal story. This is maybe the embodiment of a pitch that you want to have, but this is your own original content. For example, when I was starting out with Casagrandes, I was a freelance writer and I was reached out to by the story editor in the room, and she wanted to know what samples I had. I sent her an original sample that was about a Latin American teenager in her neighborhood dealing with zombies and ghosts. Now, that is definitely not Casagrandes. It's not. There are supernatural elements, but it's not generally a spooky show. However, I did talk about what it's like growing up in a big Latin American family, what it's like in my neighborhood, what it was like for me growing up, and that's what the story editor responded to. She said, oh, Rebeca, yes, I know you're a Stranger Things ghost story girl, but you're writing about family, you're writing about cultural stories, and that sample actually got me the chance to write a freelance script for Casagrandes. So you never know what story editors are looking for. Sometimes they just want to see the skill set that we take for granted about ourselves. But when people look at our writing, they don't see the ghost story. They see that you're writing about characters and family. The second form of a sample is a spec script. If you are a Casagrandes fan, you don't necessarily have to write a Casagrandes script to get an opportunity to be a freelance writer on the show. You can actually submit a Loud House script or a Gumball script, anything that's kind of within the wheelhouse, like we were talking about, where you are demonstrating an ability to write for an ensemble cast or this demographic or this age group. So always submit stuff that you love, because when you are applying as a writer, you really are submitting your point of view to the story editor and to the showrunner, and they want to consider, oh, is this person someone who we could rely on for cultural stories? Is this someone that we could rely on for jokes? You really want to make sure that you are presenting who you are as authentically as possible, because that's what they're going to continue to expect from you when you join the room in the rotation. On Casagrandes, we're always looking for folks who can lean into various aspects of the show. Yes, it's about a Mexican Mexican-American family, but if you know what it's like to grow up in a big city, if you know what it's like to grow up in a big family, if you have immigrant stories, that's stuff that we're always looking for. So you never really know the role you're going to play in the room. That's why when you're submitting that portfolio, let it speak to your truth. Let it be the stories that you really, really are passionate about telling, because if you get rejected, it's because it's just not a right fit, and you want to submit and put your best foot forward and think, you know what, if I wasn't accepted for this room, it's probably for the best, because there's just so many mechanics that go on that maybe it just wasn't the right fit. But when you do get in the room and it is the right fit, it's glorious. The second piece of advice that I always give young folks and anyone who's applying for a writing job is to research and reach out. So before you fully start emailing every professor you've ever had or every job contact you've ever had for either letter of recommendation or for some advice, do the best you can to research. It's just so much better for both parties when you've done the research to know as much as you possibly can before you ask someone, hey, can you give me all the advice that one would need to start a career in writing? And it's earnest and sweet, but I promise you, if you go into it like, hey, have you ever heard about the Nickel Fellowship? Or what about the Nickelodeon Writing Program? Do you think that's a good option? And when you're reaching out that way and engaging with your mentors, it shows them, hey, this person's done their research and they seem really engaged, and that's inspiring to react to as a mentor.
A good fix for this is join the professional organization that you want to be working in. Join that field. There's organizations that have college student memberships. I joined the editorial cartoonist group a million years ago as a college student. I think I crashed all their conventions and I met everyone, because really there's not a whole bunch of us, but I met all the people that I wanted to be. And that's a way to get closer and to like actually participate and be a human and not just be a stock online.
So the third route when you're applying to the writer's room is the tried and true production route. If you are starting off in production because you're curious about animation, if you already know in your heart, like I did, that I really wanted to be a writer, production is grueling. It is really, really, really hard. Also, as hard as it is equally, if not more, rewarding. So if you are someone who's like, I don't know if I want to get into editorial, or I really just want to see what it's like, maybe you're coming from live action, it's a great way to get training and understand the pipeline, understand the process, learn how problems are solved, not just in the writer's room, but also at animatic screenings, when you're getting executive notes. All those aspects will build you up as a writer and give you a sensibility to, like, shout out to the BG artists, shout out to the character designers one time, because if you are writing and you don't even have any sense of like, oh, each of these things that a character touches is a prop, that's an asset that needs to be built. If you're a 2D show or a 3D show, that takes a long time. So having that awareness of the pipeline, if you're going from PA to production coordinator to then script coordinator, that's a trusted route. It's one that I took, and it's not for everybody, but know that that's definitely an option for you too. We're in the writer's room, you got that job, you love it, you're on Casagrandes with us. We're happy that you're a new writer. The pipeline overview that we're looking at here is the start of the life of an episode. So all life begins in the pitches, and these 6 stages encompass roughly 10 weeks of the pipeline. We start every story off with a pitch, and the writer will come in on a Monday and have 3 ideas. To be honest, it's usually one brand new idea, an old idea that they've had before, and sometimes an idea that they're like, I haven't really ironed this out completely, but this might be a story area we're interested in. At that pitch meeting, our showrunner, our executive producer, will decide which one we're going to go with. And that's from a variety of reasons. Maybe we just did a Carl episode. Maybe we know that this week the executives or Nickelodeon is looking for a music special. There could be a number of reasons that help him make that decision, but he makes it. And after that is decided upon, the writer will then go and start on their, her, or his premise. And that's just a 1-paragraph summary of like the rough structure of what that episode is going to be like. There's definitely a beginning, middle, and an end, and we have a sense of whose story it is, what was their goal. After that premise, that 1 paragraph is approved by our executive at the network. We then break out into a story break. That's my favorite, because that's when we really get into the let's figure this out phase of the story. So maybe we knew we're going to do a Ronnie Ann summer camp story, but this is what we figure out in terms of the act breaks. we think, okay, what's going to be the problem that she's going to solve? What's the message that we're maybe going to try to tell? Or maybe the message doesn't appear until the end of the story break. And the writer has a great list of Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4 notes, and she's launched then on writing her outline. And she'll have about a week to 10 days to turn in that outline. And that's just a summary of each scene that's going to be in that story. Once we submit the outline, the network approves. Awesome. That writer is launched on her first draft. So for example, this week I'm on first draft for my episode, and it's taking a look at the notes from our executive, notes from the supervising director on our team. Maybe there's a way we can make the episode easier if we reuse backgrounds, if we trim a character here and there. All of that is figured out in the first draft. As a writer, you want to try to make sure all your ducks are in a row and you've solved as many story problems as possible, because when you submit it, like I'll be submitting mine on Sunday, you are offering it over to the room and it becomes the room's project. And that's when we have the 2D punch up. And now all the writers get to take a look at that draft. And by punch up, we're referring to joke punch up. So they'll go through and look at the lines and think, is there something funnier Carl could say here? Or, I thought it'd be funny if we had this moment, or a water balloon fight. Like, we'll pitch ideas to each other. Nothing too grandiose that'll completely alter the trajectory of the story, but little tiny things where we're like, is there a fart joke here? And then you have 5 adults like, is there a fart joke here in this story? But we really do those things because we're like, how do we get the 8-year-olds approval? How do we get the 12-year-olds approval? We want to make sure there's something for everyone. And we get that by having an eclectic room and everybody just pitching out their ideas and their jokes.
That's my favorite part, is the punch-ups, because, I'm a joke writer. I think in punchlines and one-liners, but also everyone has a different strength. Sometimes I come in with a wacky premise, and that's also super fun. Part of the process is coming up with some story ideas and then watch them get destroyed.
Lalo's totally right. Having those moments where we are all just riffing on each other's jokes, or we go off on a tangent talking about, a show that we're loving that week. All those things, they really are the spice of life in the writing room and process. And we really relish those opportunities to work with each other. We turn in the second draft to the network. We get some notes, usually light notes at this point because we've submitted quite a few versions to them already. Once I get that approval, then that turns into the board draft. Shout out to the board team. It's handed right off over to them in the storyboard handout meeting that we have, where the writers are talking to the board team. And if the board team has questions or the writers have questions, we hash those out in the handoff, and the script is done from the writer's room point of view. The next thing that you need to know is the 4-act structure. This is universal when it comes to storytelling. The Dan Harmon story circle, the hero's journey. This comes in many forms, but it's really all the same thing. This is the structure that we've landed on for Casagrandes. It is similar to the Loud House structure too. We have your standard Act 1, Act 2, broken up by our midpoint. We have Act 3, our low point, and Act 4. For every episode, we shoot to have 15 pages. There are moments when we're doing those punch-ups where we're like, oh my God, we're leaking a little bit onto a 16th page. It's disaster when it's a 17th page. 15 pages is perfect. That's what we aim for. And when we do 2-parters, like the Dr. Santiago special, it's approached the same exact way. So we do have 2 writers writing 2 complete episodes, but we've split it at that midpoint. So writer A would be writing Act 1 and Act 2, writer B would be writing Act 3 and Act 4. So it's just a stretched out, taffy version of the original 4-act structure that we adhere to. So going through the 2 halves, when we start off with Act 1, we're always asking ourselves, whose story is this? For the sake of today's exercise, it's going to be our girl, Ronnie Ann. We ask ourselves, what does Ronnie Ann want? Now, this is where we're thinking about high stakes, the number one thing that the network is always asking us. And that is contingent upon what happens if Ronnie Ann doesn't get what she wants. Maybe Ronnie Ann wants to prank Carl. She's sick of all his antics. I'm going to prank him back. But what happens if she doesn't prank him back? Maybe she loses her title as prank master in the family. That's something that's really crucial to her idea. identity, looking at Act 1, we're making sure that things are kid relatable. Is that something, is a conflict that would arise in an 8-year-old's life? Totally. You are sort of just dealing with identity issues within your family. You're the prankster, but someone's going to take that away from you. That's something that is gripping, and we could see Ronnie Ann and the conflict coming just from that idea alone. So we know our Act 1 is in a good place. A term that we use very, very often in the room, and is a good one to know for TV writing, is button. So that is what we call the ending joke or the ending moment of every single scene. As you're writing, you want to have a button on absolutely every scene that you have. Next time you're watching anything, I promise you, you'll see that those scenes always end on an upbeat or a very intriguing, suspenseful beat. You're always wanting to leave your audience like, well, what's going to happen next? That's the number one question. If you're writing a story and no one's asking what happens next, it's just not going to drive an 11-minute story for 8 to 12-year-olds. You want to make sure that every beat of the story, they're like, what's going to happen to Ronnie Ann? Those are the high stakes that we're looking for. Carrying us into Act 2, we know Ronnie Ann wants to prank Carl. If she doesn't get it, she's going to lose the title of Prank Master. So Act 2, we get to watch our hero try to get what she wants and repeatedly fail. This is about 3 to 4 beats, and it's definitely where we milk the most of the physical humor. That's another note the executives are always looking for, and just reminding us, like, this needs to be the funniest 11 minutes of that 9-year-old's day. We want to make sure we're telling a gripping story, but also something that isn't too wordy. It just isn't talky. Sometimes there are circumstances that we as adults, and it sounds silly, but it's true, we resolve so much conflict through words. But for kids, it's different. They want to see, for lack of a better example, a banana peel slip. They want to see Lalo and Sergio get into a dust-up fight. Anytime that we can externalize someone's wants, whether they're trying to win a contest, whether they are trying to steal a quesadilla from Abuelita without her noticing. Sometimes it's just about making that goal tangible, and you can get the physical humor out of, like, Carl grabbing it and he bites the quesadilla, it's too hot. All those silly things that we love when we're little, that's the life force of the storytelling we have. And that's where our hero gets exactly what she wanted. At this point for us, she would prank Carl. She pulls it off. He's humiliated. It's awesome. We end on an upbeat of, like, Carl getting pied in the face. And we're like, yes, we saw Ronnie Ann want something, try and fail, and she still succeeded. That was great. Cut to commercial. And it carries us right into Act 3, where we then see all the unintended consequences of that midpoint. So maybe Ronnie Ann did get to pie Carl in the face, but maybe he cries, and it's the first time we ever see Carl cry on the show. Or maybe Abuelita grounds Ronnie Ann and then she can't go out. So she had no idea that by getting what she wanted, all these other crazy things would happen too. And that's definitely another opportunity for more physical comedy when we watch things completely unravel for our hero, and Ronnie Ann has to pick up all of those pieces. The end of your Act 3 is known as your low point. And this is so important to us that we even type in MP and LP into the scripts for midpoint and low point to make sure and track, okay, is the midpoint the opposite of the low point? Like, is the low point the farthest away from the original goal that our character is going to be? So for Ronnie Ann, maybe right after she pies Carl and all those terrible things happen, she realizes, like, oh my God, I'm not a prank master. I'm a loser. I'm a bully. I just pranked my cousin. I feel terrible. And so this is the farthest away she is from her goal. Now we want to really, really make sure that our structure is tight, that it's kid relatable, that we're ending on buttons. And this is where the heroic aspect of storytelling comes in, because we really win over our audience when we see Ronnie Ann, the farthest point away from her goal, then face and solve her problem. We see her make some kind of sacrifice. Maybe she says, you know what, Carl, you pie me in the face. And you know what, do it in front of the whole school. It's not worth being a prank master if I'm a bad cousin. And when we see her make those sacrifices, usually in the form of saving her family, thinking about others, she'll get some kind of surprise win. And that's a perfect example of a button, where it's even a button on the entire episode, where we see Ronnie Ann, after she's made a sacrifice and gone through this whole ordeal, maybe it turns out Abuelita makes her a quesadilla for being nice to her cousin. And maybe it's not what she wanted, but it's some kind of uptick that reminds us, oh, that's right, we love this show. And for the sake of TV writing, different from film, we are resetting our world so that when folks watch the next episode of Casagrandes in 5 minutes, they know, oh, oh, that story was already resolved. This is going to be a new story. And we're resetting the environment that we are telling our stories in. The last segment here for aspiring writers, new writers, or just talking about writing in general is writing is life. And that comes from an experience I had when I was in high school. I did a lot of club and travel basketball. And when I got into high school, I realized when I was in workout sessions with the other girls, they'd talk about like ball is life. You're talking about basketball game last night. They were talking about the men's basketball game on the weekend. And I realized like at 14, like, oh, I come to practice and I want to talk about lost. Ball is not life to me. Writing is life to me. And I realized like, oh man, I do not love basketball to the extent that everybody else does. To me, I love writing. I love books on structure. I love any podcast where a writer is being interviewed. And so this is pre-podcast, this is me around like 14 or 15. But that moment of realizing like, oh, I think the way these other girls feel about basketball is how I feel about writing is a pivotal moment. And I'd recommend chasing that feeling, reminding yourself of that whenever you're getting into storytelling and having that balance. So that first bullet there where life is writing, sometimes that switches. Sometimes writing is life, life is writing, but maintaining that balance and understanding that you are a creative person and you need to foster all of that and take care of that mentality is just really, really vital. This is something that asks a lot of you and you are giving a lot of energy, mental energy, your back's hurting, your carpal tunnel, all of it. You want to remind yourself like why you are in this to begin with. And if writing is life, is your ball is life to you, then you are definitely in the right spot. So yeah, doing all of that research, finding the things that you love, that's a part of staying sharp. It's making sure that, you know, all research is professional development. Looking at interviews, finding out resources of the shows that you love, it's all a part of keeping your tool as sharp as possible. Another aspect of that is knowing your audience. I want to know very much what our 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 12-year-olds are thinking about and what their worldview is like. And so if I'm going to write an episode about what it's like to be an undocumented student in Ronnie Ann's class, I still need to know like what are his, her, their after school activities. I don't want to be referencing something from 2009. I want to make sure that I'm as connected to what our audience is going through as much as possible.
This applies as a political cartoonist, applies to everything, even to just being a responsible citizen. Stay on top of the news. If you want to be in writing and mass media, don't be one of those people like, oh, I don't like the news because it's all bad news. Well, guess what? That's life. And don't shy away from what's going on in the world because that's what you're going to be writing about. I'm the least sports-oriented person you'll ever meet, but am I fascinated by sports stories when they're political? Yes. And look, everything is relevant. So try to be a responsible person and know what's going on outside of your little bubble.
We want to make sure that we're talking about the issues that are directly affecting not only our community as Latin Americans, but also just children in general. And so it's very important to stay connected with current events. The third bullet here we have is take good care of yourself. So maybe it's not your day, maybe you're just completely burnt out. And so take your yoga breaks, take your Tetris 5-minute breaks, make sure that you are doing everything you can. Really, really take good care of yourself. And then the last point here, maybe it's not your carpal tunnel or your mid-back like it is for me. Maybe it's your mental disengagement and you're like, I feel really burnt out. I don't really know why I'm doing this. That can happen a lot in production. But we're like, I went to film school to write and I'm copying and pasting JPEGs all day, or I'm organizing things in Excel and I feel very disconnected from my goal. I feel very disconnected from a creative life, maybe even. So remind yourself why you do it. Sometimes it's literally just me writing my little brother's name in a Post-it and I'll put it somewhere in my notebook. And then when I'm going through, I'll see it and I'm like, oh my God, that's right. I write for 8-year-old me and my 4-year-old little brother. Like I write for that. Remind whatever it is for you, if it's for your family, if it's straight up for a paycheck some days, if it's because you have a lot of pain in your heart, if you have a lot to tell, you have a lot to advocate for, whatever that reason is for you, write it down and remind yourself of it often because it's going to be your North Star and it's going to keep you grounded and remind you that, hey, this is beyond just a job. This is something that you've chosen over quilting, over ceramics, over being a nurse. You chose writing. Remind yourself why you did that. some of the best advice I ever got was from one of my writing teachers, and he told me, Rebecca, being shy is a waste of time. But I've never forgotten it, and it's true. I grew up listening to Lalo on NPR. I cut out La Cucaracha from the LA Times and I would paste it to my wall. That was the first time I saw someone with a last name like mine being funny publicly and celebrated for it. And my first day at Casa, I ran into Lalo in the hallway. I straight up have been the only Latina or only person of color in the writer's room every time I'd been in a writer's room before Casagrandes. And that's just the truth. And when I met one of my heroes, Lalo, just straight up in the hallway at Nickelodeon, I was just like completely overwhelmed. And I met so many other folks on the show who are Latin American, who are people of color, who are women and know what it's like to have been the only female PA at some point in their career. And all of that has helped me build community. When you reach a point in your career where you have Lalos or other heroes in the room with you or kind folks that you look up to, reach out to them, tell them straight up like, hey, I've never been not the only Mexican in the room before, and you're so cool. Do you have like 10 minutes to get coffee? And speak to that, and don't be afraid to reach out. The second point that I have here is find what works for you. Yes, we told you a bunch of things that work for us. We told you the general layout of what a pipeline or what act structure looks like, but don't compare yourself to other folks. Don't do it. You will want to do it. You will LinkedIn, look up every other staff writer and see like what school did they go to or how long have they been doing this? Or we all have our different strengths. We all have our skill sets. If you're doing the things we talked about staying sharp or doing your research, you'll strengthen those abilities. Don't be too hard on yourself when you're starting out. Don't even be hard on yourself when you've been on 3 different shows, because every time you get on a new show, it's a brand new experience. Trust your instinct and trust the experiences that you've had. The last thing I want to leave you with is to advocate for yourself and especially each other. There have been many times where folks have stepped up and helped me. So anytime you see someone like, oh man, she is struggling, or he's brand new, or I know what it's like to join the room or be a PA who really wants to write, but you know you are 3 promotions away from that being a reality. Take care of each other, take care of yourself. And if you feel like you are uncomfortable, if you feel like, you know what, I straight up deserve a raise, or I would like to shadow the story editor and see what that's like, ask for those things. Nobody's going to advocate for you more than you can advocate for yourself.
When I worked on Coco at Pixar, which I would just go visit and work there and then come back to LA. And one day I asked, could I see a little more of your production pipeline? Can I like shadow an animator one day or the director for a little bit and not have to work? And then they all looked at each other and said, we'll get back to you on that. And it took a month, but they agreed to let me do it. And then they told me, you are the first outsider in the history of Pixar to ask to do that, and we're letting you do it. So you were the first one to do this. Knucklehead me. And I was like, wow, okay, see, so ask and, what's the worst that could happen? They could say no.
To be completely frank, shout out to all the people of color, Black and Indigenous folks who are watching right now. You need to know that a lot of the things that you're going to experience, the rooms that you're going to be in, very likely when you guys are having your experiences, you'll be the first in many capacities, in many different ways, in the experiences that you have. And that's why that advocacy is so paramount to us having not just a seat at the table, but making our own table. That's possible when we get to learn about the different aspects of the pipeline, learn about the different facets, learn about the different jobs, connect with each other, building that sense of community. We'll be able to create those tables and invite whoever the heck we want.
We totally have space for 12 extra people.
Lean into what you love to write, because the samples that you give are what they're going to expect from you on a weekly basis. So if you're turning something in, you're like, well, I want to get on Star Trek, so I'm going to submit this sci-fi spec. But if you're not a sci-fi person, don't do it. If maybe you love the group aspect of it, or maybe it's a comedy approach that they're going to do with Star Trek, maybe those are things that you can think about when you are tailoring the samples that you have. But definitely don't go for something if it's not resonating with you with some aspect of the truth that you want to tell. So Unfortunately, this is something that really is tailored to the show that you are applying for. So the best advice I can give is submit your best work. And if you are looking at your body of spec scripts or samples, make sure there's something that connects to it. I don't want to apply to Star Trek with, maybe a romantic comedy if it's not, translating at all. So find the ways that your work and what you like connects to the show and tailor your portfolio to that. I will definitely say that when you are writing outside of your own culture, that research and also reaching out to folks of color, friends of yours who could read and give you their thoughts. That's just in general for writing. So I'd say start there. Talk about your story with friends and family and find the big picture aspect of the story that you're looking to tell. So find maybe the themes that are resonating with you. Maybe they will emerge as you're developing plot and you're connecting all of these things. Maybe it's going to emerge when you're thinking about your heroes, your characters. And when you strengthen those characters, the ideas of who they are, this person's a morning person, this person's a evening person, having that conflict, all those clashes will then pump up your plot, will then have you say, oh, well, there's a lot of conflict here. There's a lot of identity seeking. There's a lot of friendship. All those things will emerge when you're strengthening your characters, when you are thinking about how they'll interact. That makes your plot. And when you're taking a look at your plot, the themes will then emerge. Right before I joined production, I was teaching English. I was working with high school students and talking about story and literature every day. And I never thought one would translate into the other, but it completely does. The skill set that I learned in grad school when I was studying to be an English teacher after I did film school, you want to make sure that you are not only possible to understand when you're talking to folks, but also that the information that you're looking to communicate is impossible to misunderstand. And that is something that I really, really try to think of whenever I'm writing, even when I'm pitching. Sometimes we think, oh, it's all on the page, but really half of it is still in here and here. And you want to look at your writing and think, is this super clear, like straight up to an 8-year-old clear when we're thinking about, is it kid relatable? Are there high stakes? All those things are stuff that I learned in the writer's room, but I was able to get a sense of the teaching experiences that I had and translate that into a room and think, well, communication, clarity, all those skills are a key. I will say that when you are starting out, exposure is everything. So you want to make sure that your art is accessible.
Young artists always come up to me, and one kid actually said, I can't show you my work because it's so good that people are going to steal it. And I'm like, dude, well, go enjoy it wherever you have it hidden. But your work's never going to improve. If you're a creator and you think your idea is so great that someone's going to steal it, but you can't come up with another idea, maybe you're not cut out to be a creator.
My grandmothers came here, were born in Mexico and Costa Rica in the 1930s. And when I'm telling my family about the stuff that I do or the stuff that I love, and I remind them hey, I know this is crazy and seems disconnected, but I do all of it for you. Find why you do it, hold on to it, keep it in your heart, and realize that you are your ancestors' wildest dream. It's crazy we get to be here. It's crazy we get to tell stories for a living or try or be in this struggle all together. Know that you are not alone.
I'm working on a lot of projects, and sometimes they will say, okay, we don't want to get too political on this. And I just laugh because I'm really only working on projects that have brown people in them. I get to pick and choose. That's all I want to do, to show that even just putting a brown face on TV for a little brown kid to see, that's a political act. That's a revolutionary act. Even today, where the world is changing, hopefully we're going to that future where that's not a rare occurrence. So that's what I'm working for. So find why you're doing it.
Shout out to all my queer writers, writers with disabilities, folks from immigrant backgrounds, folks who had to figure out your FAFSA by yourself, folks who get nervous every time they start a new job, folks who have to code switch, folks who are Black, Indigenous, people of color writers. We need you more than ever. You might be scared, you might be terrified, you might be so nervous. I'm so nervous doing this presentation, but when you have folks like Lalo who are working at your company who are there maybe in a different department, but they see you, when you see someone else, let them know you see them too. And, we need you more than ever. Do not be discouraged. It will be difficult, but it is possible. And tell them that Lalo and Rebecca sent you. We sent you. Do whatever you want to do. Build those worlds.